Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I am very excited about the conversation we're going to be having today here with Steve Tashjian, because I feel in my getting to know him over the last few weeks with our calls leading up to this, I've learned a lot about the work that he does and the intentionality that he puts into his work. And just in those short interactions, sensed a deep reverence for the work, a commitment to the process, and an appreciation for the mastery that can unfold when one loves the work that they do and approaches it with full presence and engagement. So if you guys have not been introduced to Steve yet, let me just read a little bit about him, and then we'll jump into today's topic. Steve is a renowned leader in the sports performance and high-performance coaching space. He has prepared triathletes for the Kona Ironman, boxers for world title fights, and the U.S. men's soccer team for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. And he's worked with golfers and just is learning so much from these rugged environments where people's, livelihood is not just at stake, but also their skill and what they're committed to requires all of them. And beyond sport, he's coached executives, VPs at Stanley, performance directors at the Phoenix Suns. He's helped Colorado Rapids develop organizational identity and has given keynotes on collaborations at Fuel 50 and WebPT. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the show, brother.
Yeah, appreciate it, James. Thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really cool about the work that you do is particularly with the soccer team. I want to start there. We were briefly touching on this when we connected last about the time in which you have to build a team and the lack of interactions that they may have, the time zones, the skill levels, the maybe the different commitment levels, the language barriers. What in building a team, let's say in a short period of time, what are the things that you have found to be most important to focus on initially, given you don't have a lot of time and there's so many people coming maybe from different vantage points? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, I think the environment that challenged that the most was with the national team. Just there's several reasons why. I think first, if you were just talking about the moment we came into the U.S. Soccer Federation as a coaching staff, we knew each other well, myself and the head coach I came in with, and the coaches that came in with us. So there was a familiarity with that, but we're coming into a whole, NGO of individuals that have operated on with different processes and environments and values and have been executing something a certain way for a really, really long time. And then there's the player group. The player group is different than in club soccer, where you're dealing with the same roster of 20 something guys day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. This instead is an environment where on any given week, when you're calling players into camp, a lot of it's based on their form. A lot of it's based on their health. Are they injured or are they available? So you've got this constantly shifting environment that not only is shifting in terms of location, because we're never training in the same place or getting together in the same place within the United States or anywhere else in the world, but we also are seeing different faces from a player roster. So right away, I would say the most important aspect of forming teams quickly, getting on the same page quickly is as leaders within the group, you have to know what you're about. There needs to be an alignment around identity. I've always I've always gravitated towards this first when working with a new organization. How connected is everybody around common values, around common purpose? And in this environment, it was critical because we have them for 2 weeks. We show up on a Thursday or Friday. We get set up at the hotel, training ground, wherever we are. We arrange for the arrival of the players, but they're coming in Sunday, Monday, sometimes Tuesday at the latest, and we're off and running. In our window during COVID, we were playing our first game on Thursday, so there's not a ton of time to be acclimating in this regard. So right away, I was like, does everybody understand who we are?
Hmm.
Not just in terms of what we're trying to accomplish as a group in the short term and the long term, but is everybody clear on what are acceptable behaviors and actions in this group when we are together? Because you'll find that sometimes as we drift apart and we have these periods of 2 or 3 months where we're not together and they're back with their clubs, they're engaged in another environment around a
Right.
whole different set of values. And then they come back into ours and they're, they don't always remember what it is we're about now versus what they were 3 days ago in their other environments. And it takes some consistency and repetition, but in the short term, it's about is there alignment around who we are? And then from my perspective, immediately when you say behaviors that aren't us, what are you doing about the behaviors you don't want? How quickly are you addressing it in a very personable way?
Hmm.
Pulling people around and saying, hey, like, this is what I noticed. Remember what we're about. Is it clear? And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, you know what? Right, right. I got you. I was like, all right, because that's not the way we operate. You're right. I got you. Like you have to be really quick in drawing people's attention to the behaviors you don't want. I think a lot of, cultural, guidelines will tell you it's more powerful to spend time addressing the behaviors you don't want rather than preaching the behaviors you do want. A lot of times people are watching, they're looking. And as soon as you publicly deal with a behavior
Yeah.
you don't want, that tends to be more powerful in shaping a culture than attaboying everybody that's doing a great job in following your values and living the behaviors you want. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Did you have your stuff dialed before you started the project, before you started the team, as you said? Do you know
Hmm.
what you are? And can you communicate it really well? Not just you, but everybody in your group. That's the one great thing about U.S. soccer with Greg Berhalter is like his leadership team. It didn't matter who the player or support staff member came into contact with. If they came into contact with anybody from that leadership group, our message and our vocabulary was identical. And
Mm.
that's probably the quickest way early on to shape it. Now, if you're
How,
talking about, go
question
ahead.
on
Sorry,
that.
James,
How
go ahead.
how would
Yeah.
how would they was there any talk about the ego management part of things? Because I imagine athletes at that level, maybe getting accustomed to certain things or preferred behavior, that the coaches maybe have given to them over the years. They can walk in with a certain level of like, I'm the best, or I know what I need to do. How were those types of things either checked, brought to people's awareness, or mitigated before everything started?
I love the topic of ego. This is super intriguing to me. Uh, because we think ego is a bad thing. And I think we have to be very clear in what we mean by that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to be as concise as I can here. So to answer your question quickly, it's first and foremost, we started every camp, our first meeting by repeating who we were. Repeat the vision, make sure they understand the mission, and then, be clear on what our values are. Every single camp. It was the first 3 slides of every presentation, welcome presentation that Greg did. So that's a big part of it. Is like, hey, you you can have confidence. Trust me, we want every player super confident. But ego is a different conversation. The author I love most on this is Scott Barry Kaufman. And he illustrated ego this way. It's not on an on-off switch, right? It's not on, out of control, culture crushing, and then off, lacking performance, lacking decisiveness, lacking conviction. That's not what it is. He said it's on a volume dial. And I love that
Mm.
because that's really what it's about. Like in the moment, when it's your time, I want guys to understand when they can turn the volume up and appreciate their form, appreciate where they are in their confidence in themselves, whether it's staff members or players. That's, regardless of who we're talking about within the group.
Right.
But at the same time, there's moments where it's the volume of that particular confidence that will now affect you from hearing other people, from
Right.
connecting to other people, from understanding and be present in a circumstance, to have the awareness to understand what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So I look at things in that way. So now if I'm dealing with a situation with a player or a staff member, it's more about I don't want to kill ego. I don't want to be like, we don't want that here. That's not us. It's more, hey, like, did you see in this particular situation that we needed greater connection from you? And at the moment, the volume of your bravado at that moment just didn't allow us to, you just didn't land in the group. We couldn't, ground control to Major Tom. Like we just couldn't connect, right? Did you see how like we were struggling to find you and we couldn't find you? And that's more it for me. I think the process of understanding sport and ego is, it's grounded in the media's perception of big money stars with, no real connection to anything other than themselves. And like that could not be further than the truth in professional sport. These are human beings who are asked to do incredible things on any given Saturday, Sunday, because they're going to get hammered, blasted for it if they don't. And then we're mad because they're confident and they have this persona that they need to present in order to be themselves. I had several players that in the warm-up, I could see them getting into character.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. I loved it. I loved it. I think I did the same thing, whether I'm totally aware of it or not. When I was in meetings where the doors are closed and it's just the high performance staff and we're here executing our process, if I think back on it, I probably have a certain persona in that moment, a character that I play because it's the character that the group needs. And then I think when I'm in the coach's office or I'm in a boardroom or I'm dealing with, a global leadership team and there's a C-suite in front of me, I definitely think that there's a persona I take on, a character that I'm playing so that I can be the person they need in that moment. And players are doing the exact same thing. And we should be encouraging them to be doing it at the right moment, at the right time, in the right way, so that they continue to be what the group needs them to be in any given situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I imagine the love that they have for soccer and that persona that gets created, if not checked or brought to their awareness, that can then leak over into other areas that maybe that persona is not needed, right? And it's through that intentionality and that level of presence in a conversation where you bring up these potential conversations and
Hmm.
invite new ways of operating depending on the setting, the context, or the relationship.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
cool.
Because those are the moments where you end up having those conversations where you go, "What are you doing?" And that's okay. That's an okay conversation to have too.
Sure.
Sitting like when you have the moment, going, "Dude, what was that?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" Sometimes they have no clue. I've been the one that needed to be checked before. A good example of something so simple. I think it was a pre-match meal or I'm trying to remember what it was. And it was a really important game that had a certain amount of intensity that was needed, even still at the hotel before we got on the bus. And I just was loose, you know. I have somewhat of I can get silly at times, and I can have that kind of extroverted. I like people, I like being around people, and my laugh is super loud and annoying. And I just think I I just wasn't paying attention. And I remember afterwards, and we lost that game. I'm not saying it was my fault, but my to own up my part, I need to ask myself, was I preparing the group for the seriousness of the moment in my own behavior? And, Greg called me out on it. He's like, "Did you notice this?" And dude, I didn't even no. The answer is no, I didn't. And it's too bad. I was disappointed in myself because I didn't see it. So volume was up. I had a persona, and I was into that persona. It was authentic. I wasn't pretending, it was an authentic part of myself, but it wasn't the right time. And he called me on it, and he was right, you know.
Yeah, that's cool. I imagine in sports, there's an extra level of willingness to accept feedback because there may be an underlying belief that that feedback is going to lead to more growth and effectiveness that will ultimately translate to winning on the pitch or on the court or wherever. If we were to transplant that to the corporate space, where the commitment level may not be as high or just differing levels. What have you noticed from leaders in sport, whether it's coach to players or leader of players to players, around how they hold a standard or how they communicate when what is expected is not being delivered? What are you
Right.
noticing in sport that needs to maybe be more included in the corporate side?
Interesting. One thing, I think I'm lucky because the corporate clients I've had so far have been really switched on.
Mm,
And I would say that it's not so much whether people are looking to sport to find those pearls, or if it's just the fact that the key characteristics of culture are being talked about so much that we're starting to just identify how important it is for us to embrace, characteristics of what, common day we would call, extreme ownership type stuff, right?
hmm hmm
And that is that I've seen. I've seen it. I think the things uh, that allow ownership and accountability to be successful in any organization is when you enter into that moment where you're going to address a situation with an individual or individuals. The success of that conversation is going to be dependent on your culture and aspects of it, specifically around how much does everybody trust each other
Yeah.
in this particular environment. Like, do we feel a sense of belonging to a place? We've heard psychological safety so often. This is in that realm because if I'm going to go into a situation, it's time to be vulnerable. It's time to have really difficult conversations. Those don't go well in environments where there's little trust. And so it's not just about the approach. Like, what have I seen? I've seen this go well. One, definitely because of the way the individuals handle it, for sure. But even before any of that, it's because the environment illustrates that it's a safe, trusting environment. Like,
hmm
these folks trust each other. That's the key to start with. And then the conversation itself has some very interesting common characteristics. You see people entering that conversation by first addressing what their role was in the mistake. I don't come to James and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. I got to say, like, I got to call you on this, man. Like, this wasn't good enough." Right? There's a certain amount of immediate, well, wait a minute, like, one, like, who the hell are you? So, but instead, if I came to you, James, I said, "Hey, listen, like, I was looking at this situation, and I think we can agree, like, the outcome isn't what either of us wanted, and I need to apologize because, you know, to be fair, going into it, I didn't do a good enough job of being clear and messaging this. And then my role was to do X in this, and I did it too late. Like, I don't think I assumed that I brought enough to the table for it to be clear what our standards were, what the expectation was. And I just didn't do it, man. Like, and that's on me. Like, all of a sudden, James is like, okay. I said, and the one thing I want to look at is, when I'm looking at how we did this together, when you executed X, knowing that our standard is Y, can you see how we fell short together? All of a sudden, like, you're more willing to admit you made a mistake
Hmm.
because let's say in the situation, I'm a reporting line. I might be a department manager, or I might be, your direct report. Like, it's a whole lot easier for me to be in a place where I can talk honestly when somebody like your department head is willing to be that vulnerable first. And so that's what I see. And it's not necessarily, like I said, it's because the environment has a lot of trust in it already.
Hmm.
But I think some of the key characteristics I see are aspects about how that approach takes place.
Yeah.
Other times, especially with players on the field, trust is everything because they don't have time to be vulnerable first. The
Right.
conversations on the field, on the court, whatever the athletic, arena is, those are much more direct and transparent. And there's vitriol in it at times, and there's,
Hmm.
it can be very direct. I don't think you'll ever see that in a corporate space and it be successful because in those environments, the sporting wise, you get back into a locker room, you have a chance to debrief, and you're like, hey, like, that was pretty brutal, but I needed to get your attention. And then there's the ability to start talking about roles uh, in the whole process that led to us coming up short on an expectation, whatever it might be. But within the corporate spaces, I think that's what I'm finding. Like, if people are having a really hard time being accountable, if that's what I'm hearing from people that have called me in, they might not know this, but my first place where I'm going to investigate is whether you, as the leader, created an environment of trust, because that's usually the precursor
Yeah.
to owning it. And people own very little in a place where they feel like, I don't know who's going to stab me next. So I'm just going to look after myself.
Yeah. I've always asked myself, at least the last maybe year to 18 months, what facilitates trust and how do you speed up that process?
Hmm.
And at some level, trust takes what it takes, right? It just is, people can get it quicker than others, and depending on people's pasts and how much potential trauma they have or just experience they have in that situation, it could take a little longer. What have you found to be really effective situations that either one can place themselves in or create around them to have more opportunities where that trust can deepen in, let's say, a quicker amount of time? Because, to use the soccer analogy, like you have 2 weeks, right? And maybe you play 10, 12 days later. Where,
Hmm.
how are you gauging that trust, and what are you doing to potentially strengthen or speed up?
Yeah, I'll break that into a couple of categories. I think there's the situation of coming into a new group as a leader and having to build the trust quickly. And then there's, as a leader, maintaining an
Yeah.
environment of trust over time. And those are two totally different things. So far, and I'll speak, what I'm about to say is because it's the result of not doing it right and the result of then getting it right later, is, you know, when you step into a new environment, you have to do way more asking of questions than answering of questions. That for me is the starting point. And what questions do I want to ask? The first thing I want to ask people is, like, are you being used to your strengths? Are we maximizing what you can do for this group? I start with that. Like, we're about to craft something together as a group. And I want to know if you feel like we're placing you in a position based on what you think you're really excellent at to benefit this group to a high level. And those conversations go a long way. And it helps for them to see that you're writing stuff down, like
Mm-hmm.
taking notes, recording it, whatever it is. Like it's important. And then in that moment, it's like if they are feeling really valued, then now the next step is how do you give them more value? Because what gets missed often is I'm not coming in to lead a group to a goal. I'm coming in to support a group to a goal. That's my job. My job is to come in and try to create an environment that's clear, aligned around a very specific identity, where individuals know their roles and responsibilities and they're attached to their strengths and where they can bring the most value. That's my
Mm-hmm.
job. If
Mm-hmm.
I can do that, and at the same time, weave the interconnectedness that's required within high performing environments, then all I'm doing now is fostering that environment. I'm a policeman at that point. All I'm doing is saying, hey, am I in a position where I have a good view of this so I can manage and police our culture and move the group collectively towards our goal? Then I'm building trust right away by making sure everybody feels they belong. If I can do that, I'm building trust. Now, maintaining it long term, I'm not sure if we talked about this on our prep calls, but it's very similar to how I taught my daughter how to bowl. And you show up, there's a lane in front of you. She's got a ball, there's pins at the end, and I just put bumpers up in the gutters. Right. That's really my philosophy on leadership in these regards for long-term sustainable trust is in these environments, I don't care if you throw it overhand, underhand, backwards. All I care is that it hits the pins. The lane and the route inside the bumpers is your space to put your creative stamp on how you do your job. If I've put you in the right position where your value is attached to your role, and that's attached to how you can affect this team, then all you need to do is just worry about when you get close to the boundaries, which are our values, which is our identity, like you'll feel me. You'll feel me, and then we'll just be guided back into the lane. And then if you cross over to the other side and it's extreme in your application of your creativity, you'll feel me or you'll feel the group. You'll feel our values. Long term, it's about how we create bumpers. Are we in a position where the boundaries are clear? And it's messaged so clearly that whether it's me or accountability partners within the team, like you'll feel us, you'll
Mm-hmm.
feel it, and eventually we're going to hit the pins. Like that's the whole point of this. So if I can create that, then long term trust is going to stay and maintain itself within our group as we operate together.
Mm-hmm.
And best leaders I've ever worked under just asked great questions. They were always available. And somebody told me that the fastest way that I created trust in the groups were that I was very clear and quick to admit when I was wrong and when I made a mistake as a leader. They value that. Little things on calls like, apologies, guys. I know I'm long winded and I struggle with being concise, but bear with me. Like making fun of yourself in a way that allows the group to see that we
How
accept we're not
self-aware are you
perfect.
too?
Yeah, that we're not perfect, Like this is a human business. And I think what people want is to know that I have space. I have space to be amazing. I have space to make a mistake. And the way we deal with mistakes is by supporting people so they don't make the same mistake again. Like those are really great trusting environments. And if I'm in that environment, I'll take risks. Like that's the big thing is, you know, collaboration is all about risk taking. And to collaborate, you need trust. And what I mean by that is Our willingness to collaborate in any given situation is totally dependent on the level of risk we're willing to take within a group.
Hmm.
Because in collaboration, you're accepting that the final outcome isn't totally under your control. So, what is trust in that situation? What's trust in a collaborative, high performing team? Trust is the understanding that when I'm not in control, the outcome's going to be okay. And they're building that is it takes strategy, but that's when you know you got it. When when members of a collaborative group are willing to take risk, you're in a good spot from a
Hmm.
trust perspective.
Cool. I love that. Another one of the things that you talk about is like the complacency that can begin to form in a team of any maybe
Mm-hmm.
of any stature. What have you found to what produces that, and what
Mm-hmm.
do great teams do to not have that happen? Or if they notice it happening, what have they done that's been really helpful?
Interesting. Yes. I think there's two different ways this happens. The first way, I'll refer to a book that I love. It's such a quick read, and it's called Hunger in Paradise by Ankerson is the last name of the author. And I'll say this, like, well, first to answer your question, what causes it? Winning. Winning causes it, is one of the biggest causes. That's what Hunger in Paradise is about. A la Nokia, a la Blockbuster, we can go down the list of companies who were winning in massive, massive, massive ways, and complacency led to a total lack of awareness and cognitive dissonance that created, catastrophic collapses of companies that, Nokia had a 60% market share at some point of like that's to collapse in that way is unbelievable, but it's winning. That's one part of it. A second way that I've seen is when an organization, and you got to follow me on this, organizations that love to promote from within,
Mm.
but they don't have a clear identity around what high standards are, what elite standards look like, and a way that they teach their individuals how to live their culture and live those standards at a high level. So let's take that example. I'm in an organization that loves to promote from within, but we don't have standards. Like this is a problem. All we know is our group. So, one, you're an insular organization. If you've read The Fifth Discipline about learning organizations by Peter saying, like, a learning organization needs to come in contact with outside perspectives, right? Well, when you're an insular organization and you promote from within and you don't have standards and you don't provide growth, the growth resources, your chance of promoting somebody of quality is diminishing drastically. So complacency becomes us falling to our own average. That's happening. That's happening in organizations. So you end up feeling this, what I call is a comfort with mediocrity. That's until somebody from the outside comes in and really starts exploring the reactions you get when you start slowly drawing people's attention to issues you might have with their performances.
Mhm.
They look bewildered, like, wait a minute, is he saying I'm not good at what I do? It takes them a while, and they're like, who is this freaking guy? And like they don't realize the level of complacency. And what's the analogy with the frog in boiling water? These aspects of that that's another aspect of complacency. Dissonance plays a role in that. Groupthink plays a role in that, but groupthink plays a bigger role in companies that are winning. That's a big, big issue when it comes to that dissonance of we are a monster company. And we've been a monster for years. And all of a sudden we stop paying attention, to leading KPIs, and we're paying attention more to lagging stuff and things. A great example of this is also in that Hunger of Paradise book, as it refers to Lego and SAG, like two companies that, SAG is a great one because they were actually killing it. And the new CEO still chose to make major changes because the KPIs were saying, yes, we're selling our product, but our consumers aren't using it. They're actually bringing it in because they feel pressured to do so. And then down the line, they're not renewing. We don't have renewable business. We have new business, but not renewable business. He's like, people are, well, this is a bad sign. And changes were made even though they were winning. Right? Lego is different. Lego is losing. Lego is losing revenue year in, year out, year in, year out. But they're a company that was so big, they thought, like, how are we losing right now? And luckily, those two groups lacked groupthink. They lacked cognitive dissonance. And they said, no, no, no. Like, 1 plus 1 is not equaling 2 here. So we need to make a change. So in these situations, whether it's because the complacency is coming from winning or complacency is coming from a lack of awareness of an outside perspective, what high level looks like, the answer is in those situations to take a really hard look at data that tells you something about the truth of what's happening now and what's going to be happening in the future. Those are difficult things to kind of come to grip with. If you're not in a position as a leader to be constantly talking about, you know, the perspective that the company should have on who their real competition is, it
Hmm.
becomes easy for a winning team to become complacent. I think the great thing that Lego said was, we're a toy company, yes, but we're not competing with other toys. We have to understand our competition is Apple. Like, all of a sudden, the whole company went, "Oh crap!"
Hmm.
Now that's a big wake up. Regardless of your dissonance in that moment, you've now been challenged around a contextual perspective that that gives you a greater understanding of what we're up against. And that's significant. If Nokia would have had that perspective as it related to the smartphone, we might have had a different result. If Blockbuster would have had a different perspective on what streaming could be and the truth around it, they would have changed earlier. Kodak, if Kodak, instead of saying, we are a camera company, if they would have said, no, we're a company that captures memories, they would have been fine with going digital, right? Like, that's that's the changes that I see in companies that avoid it, that avoid complacency.
Hmm.
Their vision is big. Their vision gives perspective on how big the job is, and it makes the purpose of the company something bigger than themselves,
Hmm.
right? Rasmus Ankerson in his book says a vision statement isn't about what you make, it's about what you do. Right? Nothing in Lego's vision statement says anything about toys. Right? It says, to create the builders of tomorrow. That's bigger than building toys. That keeps me thinking about how do I keep moving forward? Because the
Yeah.
truth is they'll never ever fully achieve their vision. That's why it's a great vision. So that's how you beat complacency. You see organizations that beat it by being very clever and clear in how they define their why, how they verbalize and message purpose, and
Hmm.
how they construct it in a way that makes people feel bigger than themselves and makes the company feel bigger than the products they make, and instead draws attention to, the impact that they're going to have on the world, on things outside of themselves. Those are the big ones for me.
Yeah. I love that. I think what's coming up for me when you say all this is like the healthy pressure that creates, knowing
Hmm.
that no matter where your skill set is, that vision is going to require a deeper, more refined version of what you currently are, which
Yeah.
always provides more space for growth, right? And so with
Hmm.
that is going to come pressure, and that pressure might show up in the form of a conversation, in the form of project deadlines and speeding up time, in the form of working with someone that you haven't worked with before, building
Yeah.
something that has never been built before. Uh, when you work with teams or individuals with pressure specifically, how do you approach it? What comes up in conversations around pressure, and what do you what do you do or what do you share in those moments?
Yeah. Pressure kills us when we don't have an answer for the uncertainty. That's the issue.
Hmm.
And outcome
Okay,
oriented
hold on.
people.
Like pause there,
Go
pause
ahead.
there for a second. Let me think about that.
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time?
So pressure ends up having negative consequences on our outcomes when it draws attention to our uncertainty, right? Pressure is amplified
Hmm.
when we're in situations of uncertainty, right? I just not too long ago did a, a podcast called the Cello Sherpa, and the podcast was is really around the performing arts, specifically around cellists in the classical music space. And one of the things that came up was like how can we construct ways of dealing with pressure during auditions for
Hmm.
cellists? And I said, well, the reason why those auditions and the pressure of them affects us so much is because we can feel the uncertainty. If we're focused on the outcome, which means this audition is good or bad based on whether I get the job, there is a greater amount of uncertainty in that than instead if I say, this audition is about how well I executed my process leading up to this audition. Because now I'm going through a checklist. Did I go through my process this week, this month? And did I hit it perfectly? Right? Because now I can enter the situation and I'm not focused on the result. Right? I'm just going to do me. Right? In this moment, the uncertainty has decreased because I can look back on my process and I can gain confidence in the fact that I nailed it. And that process has brought me success in the past. These are the things that I see in pressure environments. What we talked about, I think, in our call was in the sporting environment, the pressure rebuilds every week.
Yeah.
Whereas in the corporate space, it might be quarterly. It's spread out over a greater amount of time. That's where sport really lends itself to helping executives in the corporate space is that we deal with pressure and it's constant. And it feels like it never lets up. Even when we're winning, it feels like it never lets up.
It may even feel
So
like it gets
what it
more when you win.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. So in that environment, like what is it about that situation that I can learn from? And what I've continued to preach in any situation is the score will take care of itself. It's the Bill Walsh book to a T. What's my process? And do I execute my process to an elite standard? Right? Because it's one thing to have a routine, but each day you go through your routine and you're not bringing attention to detail and you're not bringing a standard to the way you practice and to the way you address your routine. That's different, and you'll still find uncertainty in big moments. But if I brought thoughtfulness and awareness and attention to my practice and I executed my process, then I now enter into big arenas of pressure and I'm just leaning back on my preparation.
Hmm.
My confidence comes from my preparation. The uncertainty dies. Does it eliminate the uncertainty? No, because we still have an opponent. We might be in a corporate space where we're dealing with market competition, and some of that is unpredictable. But what I'm trying to bring to the equation in those situations of pressure is as much predictability as possible. Process brings predictability, and that's what I need to lean on. And I think as you start to see companies go from local to global,
Hmm.
this is where it becomes really difficult for them to continue to focus on process because what works in Latam might be totally different than what works in APAC. And over time, it's about drawing boundaries around how we create our processes so that we're creating them the same way. Sometimes it's something as simple as just mandating that we have a process, not necessarily saying the process has to be X, but saying as we deal with supply chain and this aspect of supply chain, what's our process? And if we have one, great. Every time we approach the circumstance, we execute our process. When we're successful, we note that our process is working. When our process was not successful, we refine it and create a new process. And now we go back to market with that process. If it worked, but didn't work as well as it should have, we assess why and we refine it. Like process, if you stay focused on that, then
Hmm.
in unpredictable moments, you'll continue to feel more and more confident that you're going to be able to execute and have a good result. So for
Right.
me, that's what pressure is about. And that's what I've learned from sport. And I've tried to bring to corporate clients is, hey, if something feels uncertain, if your heart is racing and just thinking about a certain circumstance, like first thing you need to ask yourself is, do we have a process? And can we rely on that process in a repeatable way that starts to bring us predictability in how we approach pressure?
Hmm. I love that. I have a phrase that I usually say to myself and to others is like prep so hard so you can flow so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And like if I don't feel comfortable in the prep, then I can't really enter flow because I'm going to be too heady thinking about all the things that I didn't do, which is
Correct.
going to bring even more anxiety into the moment that I'm off beat. I'm not in the moment, and then I'm going to miss everything I'm supposed to see,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
What's interesting around that too, James, that you bring that up, and I'm trying to remember. We brought somebody into camp with us, um, an outside speaker that came and spoke to the group, and there was this aspect of what he talked about around giving yourself permission to not be your best because you're going to enter Saturday and Sunday in your career, and there's going to be a moment where you're like, I don't have it. I don't have it. Your attempt to keep searching for it will make this worse. And it was really interesting to be talking about. I know what I have. I've got my B game today. So I'm going to make it my best B game possible, C game, even. It's really interesting that the struggle and the snowball we see in a lot of people is their lack of willingness to acknowledge what they are today. This is who I am, or at least until I get to halftime. Like, this is me. Let's stay here. Let's be here. Let's be the best version of this because chasing something I'm not, in my experience, is exactly what we see broadcasters commenting as a snowball effect, right? I think that's something significant to add to this as it relates to pressure. Sometimes, regardless of your process, your preparation, you're going to get there and you might not have it. Assess it, be aware of it, be present, and go like, okay, I'm just going to be the best I can today, and I'm going to be in Plan B, and this is me today.
Hmm. Yeah, what comes up for me there is I'm thinking about my prep for when I go and work with a team, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, through the questionnaire I have him fill out or the feedback that the coach has shared with me, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, how am I going to get this point across? Like nothing's clicking. It's not feeling like it's flowing right now. It's choppy. I'm unsure. And so I guess that in the moment is what I would categorize as a B, I guess, energy. But
Mm-hmm.
so then when I enter that arena, my intention is always to connect, to serve, to help that team be better than when we started the session. But then I always come back to this trust because I've seen it so many times that somehow I'm going to find something to help us get to that outcome. So, from that perspective,
Mhm.
what is how would you organize that in your mind from a I'm showing up with a B, but I still got hired to produce a result, right? And
Mhm.
then the trust that kind of goes in that you'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I mean, let's say we're stepping in to present to the board.
Yeah,
Right? This is a massively pressurized situation, right?
right.
You're a CEO, you've maybe got a couple of members of your global leadership team with you. And in that moment, because what I'll say is this too, James, like a lot of times every athlete goes into a game not knowing necessarily. You get into the flow of it and you see the way the competition is dealing with you. They might have a game plan for you. And you go, okay, I wasn't ready for this. So what do I have? What do I have now? And I just need to be great at what I have now. That's the thing that we're really talking about. So remember that you went into that situation with your client not knowing you didn't have it. You realized it in the boardroom. Now I'm presenting and the questions that are coming at me, right? Maybe I was ready for them, maybe I'm not. In that moment, for me, the most important reaction is information gathering in that moment. They're coming from a perspective that I didn't prepare for, period. Now it's take a step back, think of the next question you are going to ask. Because you are not on the same page as everybody else in the room.
Right.
You might have aspects of it, and those aspects where you know you have clarity in what they need, continue to bring your B game, address and bring value. In the areas where you don't, gain context to why, ask the right questions. And
I
then
think
in the
that, yeah.
moment, admit, I got you. I'll have that answer for you. Right? That's okay in those
Hmm.
moments because your B game and the way you're delivering on the value you have in your bag now is powerful, and lean into it. Right? Give answers, have conviction around these clear areas and strengths that you can bring to the situation now. Ask great questions, engage people so that you are showing them that you value their expertise and you're learning in the moment. And once you've grasped it, I know what they want and I know I don't have it now. You tell them when they're going to have it. I got you. I can address this. Let's go through this presentation and then I'll supplement this. I'll have an addendum to you guys by X. That's acceptable, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that's a way for me to try because that's happened. That's happened to a client of mine before. He came back, he's like, dude, I got rocked. And it was this aspect of, luckily there was rapport and this was a company that had, you know, really great growth from, for several years leading into this particular conversation. And he's presenting on a strategic plan is whatever. And, he was just like, all right, there was a gap. I need to fill this gap. And he was able to do that. But that's in that moment, we have to be great at thin slicing situations really fast.
Yeah.
Boardrooms, coaches' offices, head coaches are CEOs. Head coaches are no different, man.
Hmm.
They have the same pressures, they have the same objectives. And when you enter in, you're expected to have information around your role. And my role within high performance is always a position of conflict with a head coach. It's always they want to do more, and I'm trying to gauge how we can do that in an effective way. Because I can't always say yes. My value is putting the player first. That's what I have to do. So you enter and you thin slice fast. When you thin slice, you're just trying to say, is there anything I've missed while I haven't been in the room? That's the big thing. And then once you have perspective on that, lean into what you know you're ready for and blow them away.
Hmm.
Be clear, be concise, deliver. But on the stuff you don't, ask more questions. Be like, I know what you need. I'll have the answer for you.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I can say is thin slice well. Be really clever in developing your skills of like, what was happening when I wasn't in the room? And
Hmm.
I need to figure that out fast.
I think that's a really helpful advice. And I think if I were to distill that into a few components, what I heard there is the intention is always to learn and
Hmm.
to own your role. When you're not on the same page, to acknowledge that you're not there, to come back to questions, to bridge the gap to where you can be, and with the prep that you have done, to to exemplify and maybe even express that when applicable. And if those things are done relatively well, you can walk out even though feeling like you didn't take advantage fully of that situation. The growth that comes from that one moment can be like a 10x amount of growth.
Totally. And you know, and I know we're talking about situation, there, I'm never going to condone that you can go into several of those meetings year after year and deliver a C performance.
Yeah,
This is not a message of be comfortable with not being an A plus. That's
right.
not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When you come out of a C performance where you delivered on the value you had and you learned from the value you didn't, it's because in between now and the next board meeting, I'm going to refine my process. I need to know why I wasn't ready. A
Hmm.
player has to do the same thing. They're assessing, they come out of that game and go, I didn't watch enough video. I assumed that they were going to
Hmm.
play me a certain way, and my error is my assumption. You know, these all of these things are about in the moment, you have to do what you can control. And then afterwards, it's not about going, that was all right, and not change anything about the way you were prepared.
Hmm.
It's processes are constantly under refinement, or else you're not doing it right.
Right.
So that's the big thing to take away from it is in the moment. If you don't have it, don't chase it. But when you come out of it, you have the opportunity to do so. Refine your process, figure out why you didn't have it, and you'll be better equipped to
Mm,
enter into pressure the next time and be more confident that you're not going to miss the mark.
love that.
Yeah.
Um, as we kind of wind down here, what would you say is one of the skills that you've focused on most recently and that has paid dividends for you that would be helpful for the listener to hear, and maybe some ways that you practice that regularly?
Mhm. Wow. I've been asked this a lot, so my answer is going to come pretty quick. But so that we get we have to make really, really fast decisions in sport. And what I found is coming out of sport and now being into a space where I have more time, I was still approaching everything with the same level of conviction and bias that I needed to be somewhat successful in sport. Now, I'm not saying bias is a good thing, but when you're in split second decisions and you've got pressure coming from several different directions at the same time in sport, you've got to execute and make a decision.
Hmm.
Players injured on the field. Can they keep playing? Do we have to make a substitution, which has
Hmm.
consequences, so on and so
Hmm.
forth? When you're making these decisions, you have to be super confident in your experience up to that point, which is filled with biases, right? And the way in which you can jump straight into a conviction and make a decision and be decisive. Sometimes that conviction and decision is based on a bias. You're hedging your bets that you're going to be right in sport when timelines are small. Well, now I'm in a space where I have time to think about it. I keep approaching things with the same bias. And I think that's probably where I'm trying to get better is, I do have dissonance in me. I have a certain moments where I will lean on my bias because I have a gap I can't explain. And I have more time. I don't have to react. In sport, you're just so pressured to react.
Hmm.
So the big thing I'm working on now is just, you know, enjoying that moment between stimulus and response and trying to get better at that, better at in my marriage, better at in my work. Um, I think my wife was extremely accommodating in the way I handled my responses to her and my daughter when I was in sport because she was just like, you know what? I just think this is ingrained. I think she had a certain amount of sympathy for me in that. Empathy is probably a better word. She didn't have sympathy for
Hmm.
me. She expected me to be better,
Hmm.
rightfully so. I think it's more now that I have more time to think about what the right reaction should be. An amazing book on this that floored me was by Carol Tavris. Mistakes were made, but in parentheses, not by me. And that sucker knocked me out. Like I was so convicted reading that book. And I thought, how have I made it this far when I'm this bad?
That's
And
awesome.
I recommend that to anyone in a leadership position, whether you're leading one person or whether you're leading 10 or you're leading 10,000, it doesn't matter. It was a really powerful book. And it was even worse. It was given to me by a support staff member and like, hey, I think you should read this. It's
You're like,
like,
thanks for saying it.
yeah, I remember I
Yeah.
finished the first two chapters and I trust this guy so much, like an absolute confidant that a friend of mine, somebody I consider a best friend. And and in that, I think after the first two chapters, I just called him. I was like, "You're a son of a bitch, man! Like this is bad." He's like, "Well, I didn't want to just tell you, I just
That's awesome.
I wanted it to land a little bit better." And it's better that sometimes that we're able to realize something and convict ourselves.
Yeah.
It's 10 times more powerful, I think, than being convicted by somebody else. We have the permission to be defensive when somebody else is
Hmm.
convicting us from the outside in. But amazing book. So that's the big one, man. This bias is everywhere. Bias is
Yeah.
killing us as a society, and certainly on in our own bubbles, in our own marriages, in our own workspaces. We're operating on it a lot. The more aware we can be of it and avoid the temptation to go there when we're feeling dissonance, the better we're
Yeah.
going to be.
I love that.
Hmm.
Um, okay. Where can everybody get more of you, connect with you? Where's the best place?
I think probably just LinkedIn, my website for sure,
Hmm.
elevationprox.com. The Elevation Project was started so that I could really find a space where I could engage with anyone seeking high performance from any industry. We
Yeah.
were really focusing in on sport, corporate space, and the performing arts as areas where we can apply value. And I started the Elevation Project to do that.
Mm.
Really try to connect in those three spaces in a way where I'm not trying to be anything I'm not. I'm just in a position to bring value to anyone's situation if they feel like I can do that. So the website's a great spot to do that. LinkedIn is probably the next best spot. And I have two LinkedIn accounts. If you see me on a drum set, that's the wrong account. So be looking for Steve Tashjian, and you'll see me with coaching stuff on. That's how you know you have
Love
the right
that.
one. And then Instagram at Tashjian is another way to do it. Those are the three best spots.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your commitment to your craft. Thank you for the wisdom that you've shared with us. I think it's been extremely helpful, insightful, and it's good to know that there's coaches out there like you who are, doing their best to bring more life to the work that they do and also more collaboration. I think that overall can really be something that helps the world, not just the
Mm.
organization. So
Hmm. For
thank you
sure.
for your work.
Humbled by your words, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. And for everyone out there, go check Steve out. I'm sure he's got even more great gems to drop in the way that he puts out content. So thank you all for listening. Go out there, be your own 1%, and go make some magic happen.